So I advocate very much a process of dialogue with Iran and serious discussion with Iran. I don't condone Iran's human rights record any more than I'm sure anybody else in this room would. But to isolate Iran, continually threaten it, gives more power to the most nationalist elements, the most conservative elements, and the greatest likelihood of developing nuclear weapons as a result of it. There has to be some kind of rapprochement, of debate, inclusion, or whatever with Iran. The omens, however, are not good. They're not good in that the US has now based missiles all along the Gulf. It's given Patriot missiles to most of the Gulf states, and it has an unbelievable number of newish US bases across the whole region. So I think that is a very, very serious threat indeed. And I think we have to, those of us that believe in peace and want to see a peaceful solution, to encourage dialogue with Iran, relationships, visits, and all the rest of it. Isolating Iran will not do any good to anybody at all. Our purpose is about peace, causes of war, and the way Britain has got involved in it. I mean, I've been in Parliament a long time, and obviously knew Peter very well in Parliament, and one sort of thought during the Cold War things were bad, things were depressing, and so on. But there was a kind of macabre logic to the Cold War, and a macabre sense of the limitations on both sides. That disappeared with the end of the Cold War. We had what should have been the golden decade of the 90s, which should have been the time for disarmament, should have been the time for arms conversion, should have been the time for NATO to shut up shop along with the Warsaw Pact. It should have been the time of huge hope. It wasn't, because the pressure of the arms industry, I suspect, the pressure of the military on both sides and all around, and also the economic issues surrounding the war as well as the power issues surrounding the war. So we had 9/11, we had the war in Afghanistan, and we've still got it. We had the invasion of Iraq 2 years later, and we're still paying the price for that. And now, in what ought to be a period when we're looking towards a peaceful future, the world is spending more than ever before on weapons of mass destruction. There's more expenditure, more resources taken up with wars than ever before, and we live in a world that is intensely more dangerous, and the civil liberties of the people all around the world have been seriously affected by this. What are the causes of war? Well, I'm not qualified to give all of the causes of war, but I would say they are: one, a battle for resources, as ever. And I was quite interesting. I was reading I was preparing a talk I was giving about the life of George Lansbury a couple of weeks ago. And whilst Lansbury is seen as a sort of tragically failed figure of the 1930s, one of his suggestions was that there had to be a fairer world economic system and economy, otherwise one would end up with wars as a result of the battle for resources and the conflict over resources. Is it so different today? Now, I don't know all of the reasons why Bush in particular wanted to go to war with Iraq. I don't think it was just about oil, but I think that was part of it. It was also about proving they could do it. It was also about pleasing the military in the United States. It was a lot of reasons behind it, but certainly the issue of resources was an important factor of it. The other factors surrounding wars have to be the issue of self-determination, have to be the rights of people to their own existence and own identity. And you think of the bitter conflicts that have gone on over the past 20 years. Northern Ireland is something we're very familiar with. Hopefully we're in a completely different phase now in Irish history. But look at the war that's gone on for the past 25 years in Turkey concerning the Kurdish people and the PKK. Look at the previous Kurdish conflicts in Iraq. Look at conflicts that take place in Somalia. Look at conflicts that have taken place in Indonesia with East Timor. And you begin to see a pattern which is partly wars of self-determination that ought to be able to be resolved within the terms of the United Nations Charter, within the terms of international law. Some of those have got solved, some of those are on the way to being resolved, many of those are not. So what do we do politically in this country? Well, I think this country often looks in 3 or 4 different directions at the same time. One is we are obviously very closely associated with the United States, therefore the war in Afghanistan, therefore the war in Iraq, therefore national missile defence bases, therefore our membership of NATO and the closeness of it. But there's another side to British foreign policy, which is Department of International Development, very big expenditure on international development. Some of it perhaps could be more efficiently done, but leave that on one side for the minute. The principle behind the Department of International Development and dealing with economic imbalance between the richest and poorest nations of the world has to be the right one. And I always think we have 2 foreign policies that are actually almost heading in absolutely the opposite directions at the same time. And so, what can we do within this country? I get very depressed with the continuation of the wars and the increasing militarisation of our society and the attacks on civil liberties that exist within this country. But I also get very encouraged by the number of people who now seriously consider, think, argue, walk, talk, etc. about the issue of war and peace within our society. The numbers that have turned out on demonstrations, the number of meetings that have taken place, the number of people that regularly communicate with MPs on issues of nuclear arms and nuclear development, on issues of deployment of British troops, and issues of this appalling, yawning, desperate gap between the richest and the poorest in the world. Because if we don't deal with the issues of environmental destruction, the richest and the poorest in the world, then the rest of this century is going to be pretty grim when the wealthiest powers who have used up their own natural resources will be conducting wars to gain oil, to gain uranium, to gain iron ore, tin or anything else. And at the same time, because of the problems over climate change and food shortages, there's increasing evidence that the richest countries in the world are literally buying up the agricultural land in Asia and particularly Africa in order to grow food solely for their own population, while the local population can look in through the fence and see the goodies being exported to fill somebody else's stomach. All these things are basic causes of the conflicts of the future. If we don't get it right on economy, on sharing resources, on sharing living standards, on sharing the huge technical advances that have been made, then we're in for a century when an awful lot of our money goes on weapons of destruction and mass destruction, and our young people get sucked into military conflicts from which, sadly, many of them will die. The political pressures through lobbying, through the norms of war, through the norms of military expenditure are huge, and I suspect this election campaign is the voice of peace, and the voice of those that want to cut arms expenditure rather than increase it is going to be largely lost, and it's already happening. I've seen the leaders of the 3 parties competing with each other in Parliament as to how much more they're going to spend on arms and defence rather than how much more they're going to do for peace around the world. It's not easy to break through that particular consensus. It's not easy to break through the media consensus on this, but we have to try. And if we didn't come together through organisations like this, didn't come together to have these serious debates and discussions, then our voice would be isolated and silenced altogether. So we do have to work very much harder in the cause of peace and the cause of justice. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity today.
Thank you very much, Chair.